We're now going to think about teaching Chinese characters. Firstly, there's two important statistics we need to look at. Firstly, if the students living in China and using Chinese in everyday life, when they're talking Chinese with Chinese people, 90% of the time they'll be speaking Chinese, 9% of the time they'll be reading Chinese, and just 1% of the time will they need to write Chinese characters. And so if the students learning Chinese for the purpose of living in China, of making friends, then their focus must be on the speaking. Secondly, when the student can recognize the most frequent, I emphasize the most frequent 500 Chinese characters, they can read 80% of anything. Now, when I say 80% of anything, if you take the word Mai Dang Lao, they can read maybe those 3 Chinese characters without any problem, but they may not know that Mai Dang Lao equals McDonald's. Well, they probably do. So they can read 80% Chinese characters. If they can read 1,000 of the most frequent Chinese characters, they can read 90% of anything. And if they can read the 2,000 most frequent Chinese characters, they can read 97% of anything. And this is very important. And on my website, there's a file that contains the 2,000 most frequent Chinese characters in order, the 2,000 most frequent Chinese characters, and you can download that file. And so when you're discussing with your student the teaching of Chinese characters, you must separate the reading from the writing. So let's first think about the reading. We must recognize that only beginners level textbooks have the story and the activities and everything in pinyin. After book 1, there's normally no more pinyin except for the new words. And so students have to recognize that if they want to go deeper into the language, they must be able to read Chinese characters. Now, the approach that Chinese Made Easier, the textbook series that I wrote, takes is to make it easier, to make it more gradual for the students to master the Chinese characters. Each lesson introduces the student to just 8 Chinese characters. And once those 8 have been introduced in any lesson, the pinyin for those 8 Chinese characters never appears again. And so it's a gradual increasing 8 characters per lesson, rather than in most textbooks, the all or nothing. Book 1 is in pinyin. After that, suddenly no more pinyin, and the student has to look up lots of words in the dictionaries. This is not a good use of the student's time. That's to do with the reading. Now, when it comes to the writing of Chinese characters, we have to recognize that even Chinese people, particularly young people, write Chinese characters by hand less and less. Whether it's sending text messages, whether it's writing emails, whether it's doing Facebook, all this is done by typing pinyin into a computer. And note this, when you type into a computer Chinese, writing becomes reading. In other words, I want to type the sentence, I am British, 我是英国人. I type WOSHIYINGGURREN, and somewhat miraculously, those characters, 我是英国人, appear on the screen. It seems like these input systems, very intelligent, can sort of read my mind. And so they put the most frequently used characters at the front. So when it comes to whether or not you should teach the Chinese characters, the writing of Chinese characters by hand, you should let the students decide for themselves. And so the key question to ask your students is, why are they learning Chinese? What are their goals? And how much time do they have to reach their goals? If their purpose in learning Chinese is to build friendships, to live in China, and time is limited, then they should focus on that 90%, the speaking. Now, when it comes to teaching the radicals and the stroke order, there's some really useful websites. And let's just look at a few now.